So I think that's part of the conversation today, is to unpack a little bit of the stuff around a paper that you found that was building off some work that you had done around, was it regenerative economics and the blockchain and Cello?
Yeah, they call it regenerative finance. Refi is their, instead of DeFi.
Okay.
And yeah, and so that's kind of where I've been looking at for the last like 3 articles, getting it, that sort of concept in how it's like bringing the tokenization of everything, but framing it in an ecological and like environmental, like we're helping the world sort of way. And then it's all, you know, Andreessen Horowitz and BlackRock and all these groups. So
right.
Yeah.
Nothing is decentralizing power away from those that are controlling all of the power. It's a story.
No, it's just about, you know, making their own networks more resilient, because like that's why they like decentralization. It's making just a more complex network that can handle attacks and have a higher level of resilience than if it was just like, you know, one company with one data center that ran everything. So that's how I really see like what they mean by decentralization.
And I think some people have a problem with that. Like, it's being sold to the public as it's decentralized, therefore you're more empowered. And I think people are starting to get a sense that maybe that's not the whole story.
Yeah, and now they're starting to do a bit more. Instead of like just saying decentralized, they're saying democratizing. They're framing these as like democratizing technologies because of all the voting ideas or DAOs and, you know, collective ownership of our, you know, all this stuff. So yeah, it's just another way that they're kind of framing the words. And
so can you maybe lay out a little bit about what was interesting to you about this Medium article that was talking about the interspecies game and how it sort of expanded on that interspecies currency that you wrote about?
Yeah, so the title immediately like tipped me off, because if people hadn't seen, there's a Brookings a chapter commissioned by the Brookings Institute, written by this guy Jonathan Ledgard, who outlined this idea called interspecies currency, which was basically a system where the digital twin of, say, a forest, animal, like any sort of environmental thing that could be digitally represented, which is everything at any scale, would essentially be running its own like crypto token economic system and funding itself by paying conservation groups to like having like a giraffe
drone surveillance. Wasn't that one of the things, like the giraffe herd could get together and like self-fund its own drone surveillance?
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe if they saved up for a while, they could like relocate to a better spot, you know?
Yeah, so that, and then so immediately seeing the title interspecies game, I was like, oh, okay, like that's this exact concept. And the Cello people in particular, they're the only people I've really found that talk about Ledgard's work on interspecies currency, like, and they're all, you know, they're all about it, and it's something they're openly discussing as like what they're building, because it is literally what they're building. And that's what the regenerative finance movement really is all about, is digitizing everything in nature and engineering financial instruments to, you know, optimize for outcomes. And in order to digitize everything, they have to study life in the framework of like information sciences and convert the natural, you know, really anything, natural movement, chemical processes, mating, just migration, all that sort of stuff they have to convert it into really binary math, which is the language of information sciences.
And
that
it's
they
like
want.
cyber physical too. I think
Yeah.
that's something. There was an article that I pulled out and I've been looking at the last week or so, like Steffers brought my attention to it, is this bio-informational engineering. So the idea of like full spectrum dominance, from the smallest microbes, like all the way up to like full on ecosystems, that their intention is to try to get sensing technology that will compute like biochemical information into digital information, like at all scales. And so there's transactions that are happening, but the transactions are like communication theory somewhat, and making that communication visible, which I think is really an interesting way to talk about currency. Because a lot of people might think a dollar, I go to a store and I buy a thing, or I place an online e-commerce order, but it's actually transacting that that makes the network visible.
Yeah. Money's increasingly become like, just a piece of data. It's data moving around in a community information sciences framework. And they're like you said, doing that at all scales, and they see
and then
it.
They have like the narrative of both health, the public health. We need sensors everywhere for public health purposes, and we need sensors everywhere for the climate. And then those intersect, I think, in like the premise of One Health, which is like the World Bank, UN. People don't get too close to nature because you're going to mess it up, and they're going to get, things in nature are going to make you sick. And, and it's this tension, I think, between humans being embedded in the natural world and then everything being disconnected and atomized, which they need it to be disconnected so that they can mirror it really, and then to keep people incapacitated. But it's all layered into this story, like, right, the story is we're all going to die, we're all going to die, within a short time frame if we don't follow all the rules. And the rules are the cybernetic systems, right, these cybernetic closures. And so it's governance, right, like you can veer off a little bit and then you're going to get slapped back in. And both, everything that's happening is not just to people, but it's to the natural world too. So when we're trying to advocate and interrogate the systems, we have to realize it's not just on behalf of our families or our human communities, but on the entire ecosystems, because the synthetic, like the pervasive synthetic nature of it, nobody's consenting. Nobody's actually telling what's really happening, and no one's giving their permission.
Yeah. So with the piece, they started off with the tree of life is like the central starting point. And that, I think it's worth reading because the language is kind of striking. The chief entity which embodies the spirit of the park is the tree of life. The tree has two main objectives: to become self-aware through user interactions and to enrich its relations with its community. On a technical level, the life energy of the tree is quantified and encoded to the blockchain as a fractionalized NFT, distributing its essence to token holders, which established the roots for an inclusive governance model, token economy, and game incentives. So,
it's so grotesque.
Yeah.
It's like a cage. It's like putting a cage around every natural process like possible and commodifying it. And then later on in the game, it's like leaderboards and competition, right? Like it's
and selling it back to you, because then the next, like, as it's a fractionalized NFT, again, it's a little bit in the weeds, but then they can make that have other tokens like represent that NFT, so you can make like a market out of it, so you can like trade and like earn that token through a market exchange. So that's, it's just part of the literal interspecies currency aspect and collective ownership, because like owning the tokens means you can participate in like that, the tree's governance, or, it's like whatever that.
So this is something I wanted to ask, because like it's connected with, Cello is working with the same organization, Curve Labs, right? And I have an image that talks about a climate project they're working on together. And I know you've done that work and with Ambar, and they uplift this idea of sacred economics, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this is, it's feeding into okay, now we recognize that kind of capitalism was really bad. Now we've got the good kind. The new kind has tokens and games, but it's sacred. It's like this, and they even make the connection to Charles Eisenstein, like his book about the sacred economics, and even up until recently. So it's not like Eisenstein, like they're picking up something that he had a while ago and he's not aware. Like he's actively collaborating with them.
Yeah, there's an interview with I think it was with Canavar and Eisenstein like a year or two ago. Which I haven't watched yet, but so yeah, they're active.
It's not like they've lifted his philosophy and he doesn't know about it. Like he is collaborating with them. And so to me, so much of this is about, if people knew, right? I keep saying, if people actually knew that the idea was to create a digitally twin world that was governed by some like giant DAO, like computer from the back end through your digital twins, and dropping smart dust and turning everything into a synthetic counterfeit, they wouldn't do it. But they have to spin these stories. And it's quite interesting to see the different brands, like the different brand promises that come out of this, because some of the idea of like going into the park and like finding the shrine and doing the ritual and leaving your imprint, your energetic imprint, it's very LARPy, it's this live action role play. And I will say, even back in the day, I remember coming across some MIT Media Lab work that was geared to LARPing people. And again, we kind of have a pretty, like, West Philly has this sort of LARPy culture, like, geeky teens and like young adults. And I'm not saying anything about it as a concept, but like they were targeting them for wearables that had LED colors that would depict emotion. So you would like LARP in your wearable cape that would like have these like light up things that would have some sort of visual indicator of your emotional state on them. And to me, like, so when I layer this in with these gamified rituals in public spaces for the intention of creating some sort of collective value and imprinting, because part of these, I think you go into the park and you look for shrines that are based on geolocated like imprints on your phone, and you're supposed to get in a meditative state. So they're pulling your like emotional state in with it. There is a ritualistic element to this of making yourself visible to the machine. Like there is a tree of life, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the queen and that crazy tree, because to me, the tree of life that wants to be alive feels a bit like the crazy tree of trees that was part of that Jubilee beacon lighting. Do you want to give me your impression of, it was a short clip, it's just like 90 seconds of this ceremony.
Yeah, it felt like, so the queen walks up to this like orb on a pedestal and puts her hands on it, and then there's like a 3-stranded, it looked like a double helix, but then with another one going through the middle, and I didn't really realize it from the video, but you told me later that it was actually in 2 locations. But I mean, it's certainly ritualistic, in having a third like straight line coming through the spiraling like sacred double helix. And spirals are, sacred symbols that across cultures, across time, and lighting up, and then it lights up this tree, and the tree is also designed in this like double helix with a third strand in it, but it's composed of separate little trees in like metal buckets, atomizing everything and then recombining it into their proper construction that they feel is right. And it's not, the tree's not whole anymore, it's deconstructed and then only allowed to be reconstructed under the like auspice of engineering and science and like mathematical structure. And that's totally the impression I got. And it's
a colonial project.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know,
yeah.
Take apart everything from a living system, from a culture, take what you find is useful to your power, your empire, and then put it back into your system. And that, I mean, it's kind of what it feels like. And that's what a lot of our relationship, you know, with like industrial agriculture and the biotechnology associated with it is a lot about that, you know, isolating all these things about plants and then, you know, trying to maximize the usefulness of those characters.
Can I say one? I'm curious, and this might be a bit of an overlay on my part, but it's quite a jarring visual with the queen. The two parts were set in Windsor Castle, where the queen was, and then in Buckingham Palace, where Prince William was, and the tree was at Buckingham Palace. And at Windsor, the queen walks up on this red carpet to a podium. And the podium upon which the pillow with the Commonwealth globe and the crown like is laid, when she walked up to it, it was bright pink. It was this very lurid pink, which against a red carpet, and she was wearing sort of this mint green coat dress. And I'm not really a fashiony person, but from a color standpoint, it was incredibly jarring. Like all of it, it was like red and green and pink. And then when she put her hand on it and the lights shot forward with the DNA, like surged forward like a fuse almost, right? Pressing, it went from pink to white. And so in looking back on that, and the pink, the palette was very much T-Mobile.
Oh no.
I don't know if like that like echoes with you as well, but I was looking back because your work was Cello and Deutsche Telekom. You know, and the idea of the health passports was quite interesting to me because I was looking at their logo even for T-Mobile and the T and then the two dots on either side, which feels a bit quantum, like the two at once, like parallel processing. And so I don't know if any of that strikes you at all, but maybe you could speak a little bit to what you had written about with Deutsche Telekom and Cello. And
yeah, I mean, I did not pick up on any. I definitely felt really jarred when she touched it, but I didn't really process the colors and stuff.
It was just an odd color. Like if you were gonna pick a color, like hot pink and red is just odd.
Yeah. So with Cello, they had a partnership with, Deutsche Telekom invested, and for those who don't know, they own T-Mobile. They're a German telecommunications company. They are one of the largest in Europe. I forget the exact numbers, but very, very, very big, very old, and have connections with blanking on his name, but the Alexander Bell, right? The inventor of the.
And it came out of the post office, like the Deutsche Post, and then later it was like spun out and privatized as the Telekom.
Yeah, exactly. So they invested in Cello, like they bought the token and stuff, and then they also run a validator node, which is basically, you know, of how most blockchains work these days, or at least all the ones that aren't Bitcoin, they run on what's called proof of stake, which is the way that the network is secured. And instead of proof of work, where there's all this computational energy that secures the network and, you know, whatnot, the way it works in proof of stake is that the nodes have to lock up an amount of the currency, the cryptocurrency itself, as like a financial, almost as like collateral to ensure that they behave well. And if they break the rules of the protocol, then their collateral that they locked up would be slashed or that penalized, and they would lose some. And then they earn rewards for good behavior. And that's like, it's like, you know, 10% interest or something. And yeah, so that's kind of like the basis of almost all blockchains these days. And so Deutsche Telekom is, they run a validator node, and they also are staking Andreessen Horowitz's Celo tokens because they also invested in Celo. So they're kind of like the custodian that's has a very large presence on the network between their tokens and Andreessen Horowitz. They're a very large, probably one of the largest nodes. And
Mark Andreessen's wife, Laura Arrillaga Andreessen, helped establish social impact finance at Stanford back in the early 2000s. So we have this overlap of the social impact finance and behavioral data analytics with the blockchain.
And they also, so one of the main distinguishing points of Celo and why like central banks and the World Food Program and UN and Mercy Corps and a lot of these like international organizations really like Celo, or I mean, they kind of developed it, is because they have this certain technology that allows people to receive crypto by just having like a phone number. Their phone number is the public key that crypto can be sent to. And even people without smartphones, through USSD, which is a tool on telecommunication networks, where a lot of people in like Africa and other places that don't have like internet connectivity necessarily can like do like mobile banking and whatnot. And
so it makes it more accessible for the average person who's not deeply into crypto to be able to manage and get a lot more people on blockchain.
Yeah, and just being able to for people of just like smartphones or even like flip phones and stuff to be able to like use the blockchain and use it effectively. And
Deutsche Telekom is proposing like a health pass scenario as well, like a travel verification, like throughout the EU. So then that links the phones into the health space, which is is it T-Systems? I think I just looked it up. So it said the end of February, Deutsche Telekom had an arrangement in the EU to work with the T-Systems of Deutsche Telekom.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's their cloud computing arm. And that was the same branch that's doing the work with Celo. And I think one thing
they can connect your food. They can connect your food to your health compliance status. If you're dispossessed,
and it'll all be because it's tracked from seed to all stages of the growth cycle, and then the supply chain, and then to your plate, and then into your stomach, and then back. And that's like the circular economy that they talk about, is that total tracking of it.
Cybernetics. Global governance.
But I think just one thing I wanted to maybe highlight again with Celo, and that with the health pass that they're doing, is that with Celo, they essentially are making it so that the digital identity is your phone number. Like that's the basis for your digital identity. And that's enough for, like, I haven't seen anything for governments accepting that as like formal identification or anything, but it's how the like international aid organizations and stuff are building data profiles for all these people, is using that as their like de facto digital identity. And then and then they're slowly building like the more formal digital identity, and that ties in all too with the whole credit aspect and banking the unbanked, and like
Well, I was just thinking, like people have asked me, because I feel like it's best to try to not be on blockchain, like as your identity. And people have asked, well, would you know? And the more I look at like what Cardano was doing with all these use cases, right? It's through the education, but in what some of the countries they were proposing doing it through your phone plan, right? So I don't know that it's going to say in red letters, like if, click approve, and then we put you on the blockchain, right? Because it's embedded in these layers and layers. You don't know what's behind the app. Like you don't actually know. And it's overwhelming because the implications are incredible. I've just been like grappling with I was revisiting Cuomo's press conference in April of 2020, very shortly into the lockdowns and everything, with Eric Schmidt remaking New York and talking about the track and trace. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, we have to do this for COVID, but it's not like we're going to go to all the trouble and just put it away. And then like, once you realize track and trace is literally mixed reality, like track and trace is because they need to situate you geographically at any given moment and understand your behaviors and your interactions and all of your past interactions, and then project forward your predicted like future behaviors and risk profiling, and then lock or unlock opportunities based on all of that data. Like that's what track and trace is for. And so like, I'm finding people who are pretty like relatively sophisticated in the space, but they keep going back to data privacy. And I'm like, yeah, no, but they just want you to lean into data. Like they want to scare you and say, yeah, you need data. Like here, like we had this exchange, Lynn got blocked by Tamika Tilleman, because we were like calling out the digital twinning, right? And
was that after the conference?
Yes, recently, last week. And like, so I went on Twitter and I'm like, hey, Tamika, like there's this Berggruen quote about tokenizing people as assets on blockchain. Is this what we're talking about? Like, which clearly coming out of Andreessen Horowitz, and now I think he's with their blockchain spinoff, like he knows that that's what it is, but he can't, as a person who really part of his professional brand is his faith practice, hold both things at once. Or eventually the faith communities are going to have to come back out and say like, no, we think it's cool to put vulnerable communities on blockchain so that somebody can make money. Which makes me think a bit about what you said about the staking and staking assets as opposed to the cryptography. And I'm sure the narrative will be spun that that's more environmentally friendly, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's power demands. So there will be an imperative to shift from proof of work to proof of stake. But then what could you stake? Could you stake portfolios of humans? Like how far down the road is that you're staking portfolios of human assets? Like in this equation, I don't think, I mean, I'm sure somebody's
it's not, I mean, they're definitely planning on using, like tokenized impact bonds as collateral for financial instruments. Because I mean, it's sort of hard to wrap your head around, but the staking concept, that's how like all of blockchain finance works. It's all basically locking up collateral to do other things. And for instance, like IXO, they're their own blockchain to run like to be a validator node on IXO, you'd be locking up that IXO token. And that's an infrastructure that it's all about human asset classes and ecological asset classes. So it's not, I mean, direct tokenization of the exact impact bond portfolios, but it's very close, and it will go that way. And they're starting to.
And I think people who are really focused on like the social credit scoring, which again, I keep trying to drag this back out. Like this came from Stanford, guys. Like it matters because Laura Andreessen and Stanford is central in both the innovative finance space, the impact investing space, as well as in a lot of, synthetic biology, health, biomedical research spaces, and digital media and metaverse. I mean, all of it is coming out of that. But if you understand that your social credit or your worth or value as an asset within that staking process, they need that to be recalibrated in real time. So constantly the whole behavioral economics piece that's behind it. And I would encourage people to go to Ideas 42 if they haven't, because I found that early on in my work and I didn't fully understand the significance of it, but it's out of Harvard and it's behavioral economics, and they have hundreds of fellows all involved in behavioral economics. And Richard Thaler and the theory of the nudge. I mean, it's these digital nudges, is that your agreement to go along with the nudge or not is constantly going to be recalibrating your worth to the collective, right? It will be framed as the individual's responsibility to the collective to perform. And then my question, as someone who's been doing a lot of work the last month in eugenics and bringing forward the history of like scientific management and pseudo progressivism into that space of social efficiency and automation and fourth industrial revolution, what then become our obligations as individuals to a collective in a world that only wants our compliance, like doesn't really want anything else from us, just wants us to do what it says so that we can mirror our behavior to the machine.
Yeah.
So
that's basically, I guess we have talked about it, but the alpha bonds that IXO is working on, it's that basically same exact idea. It's a mechanism to change the parameters of a tokenized impact bond based on like real world, real time data coming in, and then the investors and participants in the program participating in a prediction market about how they think the project is doing, and they have to stake their tokenized impact bond that they bought into the prediction market to it, and then that feeds back into the impact bond itself.
So I thought what was really interesting about this game, like there were several elements, and one was the game of oracles. And so I'm like, oh, what is an oracle? An oracle is a wise person that makes predictions. Right? Like it's the prediction market, exactly. And then it goes on to this game of sigils. So once you have made like an offering and you're going back and you're interpreting that, then you put your imprint on it, and the sigil is like a magical token, right? And so I feel like they're really just very lightly covering, like with this game mechanics claptrap stuff, like a really, really brutal infrastructure about these staking these bonds and behavioral compliance.
It's not like it's just oracles is a term that they just used in this like little project. Basically, oracles are the term used in like Web3 for bringing any off-chain data onto the blockchain. And so to do that, they kind of have to make, it's almost like it's not blockchain, but it's like another system of nodes that are connected to the blockchain, but also connected to the off-chain data, which is like the sensor networks. It's financial information from, like the price of Apple stock, or really everything else, because the blockchain can't like interact with that data by itself. It needs like to have a way for it to get put in. So those are what like oracle systems are called. So with the interspecies game, when they're talking oracles, it's not just their term that they come up with for a fun, like weird, fun little thing. That's like a whole big, that's where the truth is coming from. It's the bringing the entire digital system onto the blockchain, and that
like interface, like
yes,
interface between the two.
Yeah, so like the biggest oracle provider is this project called Chainlink, and they basically are just like it's a gamified like system of nodes that bring information, like say weather data, onto the blockchain. So for building all the like parametric insurance contracts, when they're paying out insurance claims based on like real-time data, say for agriculture, the amount of rain that's fallen, if like too much or too little has fallen, the oracle providers are the ones that would interface the weather data with the blockchain in order to trigger the smart contract payouts and stuff.
So it's like not actually on, does it flow into the blockchain and flow out, or it's like a holding zone outside the blockchain where that computation is done?
Kind of both. Like there would be a lot of computation outside blockchain first, but it's really the interface with the smart contracts. So it's like a way for the smart contracts to trigger based on outside data. And so it's kind of everything, like, or blockchain wouldn't be able to do very much if it couldn't interface with all the other digital data out in the world. And one of the other projects I wanted to talk about that's really involved with Cello and Curve Labs is Astral Protocol. And yeah, other weird names. And they're making geospatial data like queryable by smart contracts. So having it that you can prove that you were at a location or did something in a specific location, to the smart contract. So it's kind of like a core piece of infrastructure for a lot of the things that we're talking about. And they have an Oracle system as well. But
wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking too, like in the smart contracts and like fulfillment within that game environment of the tree of life. And literally they're talking about shrines and offerings being accepted and all of this. And, I felt for, a number of years looking into social impact finance and the role of faith-based social welfare systems, like across faiths, right? Mm-hmm. It felt like increasingly the goal would be to recreate behavioral tenets of faith, again, and there's probably some variety in there of what those are, but like as conditions, and then put that into blockchain smart contracts, wherein if you are a recipient of those services for a social impact finance deal, or you're a member of that community, then your behaviors become monitored against the social norm that is encoded in contracting systems, right? And so this crazy game, like if you understood it as like, and I can sort of see this as a total trigger event for like conservative Christians, like they would see that because there is this dynamic of like, the new age pagans are taking over the world with their nature worship, damn them all, and they don't understand like that the whole point is to create these dynamics so that they fragment people against the understanding of like, actually, maybe it's the AI, like this emergent mechanical consciousness thing that's trying to like, maybe not consciousness, but this mechanical process that's across all of it. So like, don't buy into just that, but you can see the construct that's these ritualistic offerings in the parks are almost like a pseudo religion, right? Like this Gaia type thing, which if you then bake in that this next evolutionary phase is, the world brain, risers, world sensorium, whatever, right? The polarity, we end up at the world brain, which is this collective consciousness that happens to be in a machine. It makes more sense. So
yeah, I mean, and the Web3 blockchain people, coming out of the cypherpunks and stuff, it's like a religious thing for them, especially like the Bitcoin people. It's like, cult. Yeah, very culty, and layered in a lot with the transhumanist ideologies and basically religious beliefs.
Well, that's one of the things. Like I put forward to some of the Bitcoin or the crypto folks when like I shared on Tilleman's piece about Berggruen and tokenizing people, and someone responded like, I can't believe anybody would even propose that. And yet their clear tagline, like at the front of their Twitter profile, was that they were like, it was Bitcoin and anarcho-capitalism. And I'm like, dude, what did you think they were going to be investing in? Like, where did you think this went? Like, Bitcoin, they imagine this as a organism, like an evolved new life form. And I have some clips from that 2018 presentation someone shared with me. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. He's German, again, because Curve Labs and Weave are both based in Berlin. This was in 2018, and he was with something called Spherity, but they were doing internet identity for cyber physical systems. And so again, 5 years ago, but he was already talking about the forests, organizing as companies on DAOs and emergent self-aware machines, and that they would have their own identities. They would have their own hierarchy of needs. Like they're literally saying, this is a new organism. Bitcoin is an organism. It can pay people to keep it alive. And then, wow. When you mesh this with the Institute for the Future's 10-year white paper on blockchain, which was 2017 to 2027, where they're talking automated law. Like they're talking about they need to remake democracy as we understand it so that humans and machines are equivalents. Because in a smart contract world, you can't have one, it has to be a unified application.
Yeah,
and what these sensor networks are trying to say is there isn't any difference between a human life and a machine life. It's all an equivalency because in the automated world, it has to be. And so all the people who are like getting sold on blockchain voting, like they don't understand that this is a tokenomic exchange between living and non-living things towards ends that I would say 99.5% of the global population has no understanding. Like, no, this is not you voting for president, like on blockchain. This is a much more dynamic enterprise. And it has to do with creating hybrid life, like collective hive mind consciousness where like, interspecies game. What are the species? Like what are the species, Leo? Like, is it your gut microbiome and your body and a robot in Japan and like an emergent conscious like machine? Like what is the species? Could be a lot.
It's all of them.
But you fancy it up like a game with magical incantations and leaderboards and make it seem fun, and people will just do it like Pokemon Go.
Yeah, and they'll get paid to do it too, and that's a big part. Or earn their education badge, their cultural education badge for their.
Well, that's a great point. Well, see, so this is like my perspective because like up until last fall, like I spent 17 years at a public garden in Philadelphia, and we were a community we're on the river. So there's a whole component about water quality in a very industrialized area. We are in an area that was between downtown Philadelphia and the airport, like had one of the first trash compacting plants in the country. Like we are like a national landmark for like trash squeezing, like every like the refineries, the early Titus, Pennsylvania, like the first oil refineries were on the other side of the river from us. And so like we were these 40 acres and quite fascinatingly, so it's Bartram's garden. And John Bartram, he was a correspondent with all of these 18th century landscaped, like, he would send boxes of plant material that he traveled up to upstate New York, all the way down to Florida, and like package this stuff up and send it to these, elite scientists, lay people in England to create their gardens. And he corresponded with Linnaeus and, and the whole Linnaean construct and like this embedded race characteristics, within the scientific construct, right, of rating human capital. It goes back. And so now the narrative that is being shaped, and again, with mostly good intentions, right? Like people, there is harm in our community. We're surrounded by a public housing that's terrible condition. It was built for a military Navy Yard house, like military housing in the 40s, and like terrible violence, terrible economic, like environmental racism, like food deserts, everything. And so then they're going to come in to fix it, but they're going to fix it with data-driven solutions, right? And the philanthropy that want to come in, they want everything to be, diverse, equity, inclusion, justice. Like they want all of this stuff, but it's like, what are your numbers? What are your metrics? What are, we're going to fix the people and we're going to fix the land, or we're going to fix the water, but it's all on sensors. And then looking back over my time, like I was even revisiting, we had, and it's a beautiful place. Like, don't get me wrong. It's this interface of like many different people, different incomes, different cultures, different backgrounds in this public space. It is wonderful in this park, but I'm thinking of these games, right? Yeah. In 2013, we had an event called Data Garden, where a musical enterprise came in. This is 2013, so almost 10 years ago. And they were putting sensors and things on the plants to like capture their electro like impulses and translate them into music in this participatory public engagement, right? And so at the time, it sort of felt like, I don't know, a hipster, unique, like edgy thing. But in the construct of the Queen's canopy of pots hanging off of steel arms and being used to be transplanted all over England as probably some sort of citizen science social impact thing. It's this domination principle, which I feel like is so central to the whole thing, is like, we're not working with nature. This is a dominating construct. And just, again, thinking back through my experiences, how this is being woven into normalized social culture and the way in which they're creating natural asset classes to bank. They're also going to, I believe very strongly, they're going to create asset classes for social behaviors and cultural behaviors appropriately. And it will uplift things like, diversity, like cultural groundedness, things that look really good, but they will embed it in the substrate of data analytics and the nudge factor, because within that beacon lighting, Prince William was standing by the tree. He was flanked by Michael Bloomberg. Like, Michael Bloomberg was at his side, and Michael Bloomberg is the connector between the World Health Organization, the UN climate efforts, What Works government. He was the one who actually brought social impact finance, social impact bonds from London to New York, to Rikers Island. And then through our former mayor, Michael Nutter, dispersed them throughout the United States, but it's also in Europe and India. So like, we need to make this right. Like, we need to make those actual relationality between human and nature correct. And, when I was talking about how we could maybe frame some of this, I was talking about like Robin Wall Kimmerer's perspective. And she's citizen Potawatomi Nation. She teaches forestry at the SUNY school in upstate New York. And part of her framing is that, like, in the indigenous culture, that the humans are the younger siblings. Like, we are the ones that have not been around that long, and we usually just like sit tight and look to the older beings and the rocks and the plants and kind of learn. Like, we should not be messing around in the stuff we're messing around with, but like, it's just hurtling. So anyway.
There's a lot there.
I know. What do you think? I didn't let you get a word in edgewise. You like, yeah.
No, that's fine. I mean, that last point, I feel like, is one of the most important things, and it's really hard because obviously a lot of, most people really can't, like, you're in cities, like most people are in cities, and it's really difficult, if not impossible, to just sit and like see how nature interacts with itself and us. And I mean, we are nature, and that's personally just been a big part of my life, and deciding what to do with my time and what feels important has come through a lot of sitting in nature. And I used to work in the woods, where I just be living in a tent in the woods all summer. So it's like a lot of time just like sitting and seeing, and there's a lot going on. And that definitely had a big, like, I don't totally understand the extent, like, because like that sort of communication experience isn't like, you don't know what's happening. That's like the big difference I find between like information sciences and all what they're building is it's known, like everything is like, this is what it is, and that's it, because it's a 1 or a 0, and that's the whole thing. Right. But with what I think is like real communication, like, you never know, like, you don't know what you're sending is how it's being perceived, and you don't know if what you're perceiving, like what exactly you're perceiving, you can't like know what that is. You don't know where it's coming from exactly. It's like, is it from that plant? Is it from the lichen on the plant? It's all them together? Like, what's like, so all the sensor technology and remediating all these connections in that way where everything is known just feels, it's profane.
And I think they want to like create, like for city people, which I am, like they want to create, like they'll create an infrastructure to tell you this is how you relate to nature, right? Here's an app, and you can be a good citizen by going out and identifying all of the species. We'll do a biodiversity survey.
Yeah.
And like I say this as like at our garden, we hosted things where I don't know that they were our events or people would come like in connection with partnership, because again, like we're also connected to very old dominating principles, you know, the Academy of Natural Sciences and the American, you know, Philosophical Society, and these 18th century like colonial constructs. But like, yeah, let's track everything on an app. How many birds, how many bugs, how many frogs, how many, and they sell it to people like we're doing this because we want to save the environment. And yet across the river from us is a giant refinery that almost exploded and destroyed the city. Like now that's being wound down, but like nothing that individuals were doing was shaping the larger policies that would lead to true, like substantial change. By putting it on individuals to say, if we just had more like bird counts, we would have the answer. I'm like, no, because we're actually, you shared a paper with me about AI trees, which is like the urban forestry. Like I have a honey locust outside. We planted it when we moved in our house 25 years ago. And I love that tree. And I don't know how much longer because it's stressed. Like it's stressed by EMF frequency. We have 5G now all around. It's stressed with like geoengineering in the skies. It's stressed with all sorts of pollutants that are seen and unseen. And yet they'll say, let's plant thousands of trees. That's what those trees in a buckets are for the tree of trees. We're going to go plant all of these trees in the urban canopy because quantifiably it improves mental health. It reduces violence. It reduces stormwater. But within a full spectrum dominant situation, that like if you get the sensors all the way down to the fungi, to the ecosystems, there's an environmental lab at Berkeley, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Department of Energy. Like they're trying to figure out the communications. And this is something I need to spend more time on, but it feels like, you know, we were talking the other day about an intercept, you know, the way in which like there was an intercept put in like for digital surveillance on phone communications, you know, that Snowden talked about, that they're trying to put an intercept between our natural communications, some of which are understood more clearly than others, some of which are just energetic and subtle. And then, but to try to get that engineering, but at all levels, it's like the full spectrum. And then if I feel like if they can get there, I don't know that they can do it, but they're seeking to insert themselves as this intercept into the fabric, like the energetic fabric of life itself. Yeah. And then hijack the data for their own like big data machine learning purposes to like, who knows what end on all of the simulations. But is this full spectrum dominance, like a military order, like the hollow bionts, you know, all the way smallest to biggest, like Cosmo, as above, so below, all of it. And they need us to buy into it. And I think that the thing that it's hard is that like within the blockchain space, I feel like indigenous communities have been intentionally targeted because of their lack of trust in governmental systems, understandably, that somehow the blockchain is going to offer them the freedom that they're seeking, like their sovereignty, their resources, managing their gaming systems, managing carbon trading. And this wasn't actually linked to a tribe. I thought it was actually just county park space. But in all of this, there's a big unit, like 40 acres of carbon offsets in the greater Seattle area in this Issaquah forest. And so those were actually, the carbon rights were sold to a blockchain company. And maybe like we can get into it in a little bit, but the idea of these self-owning forests, like self-owning ecosystems, and both from a finance standpoint and possibly a big data and like photonic computing standpoint. And what happens when those natural institutions become corporatized and then on smart contracts start making arrangements with drones or possibly protection. Like where does that intersect with indigenous use of like land-based cultural practice with what's coded in a stupid DAO and smart contracts? Like, are they going to have Boston Dynamics robot dogs, like prowling so that people can't like gather fungi or materials for baskets, like the things that are so terrible and have been for decades upon decades. Like now it's all automated. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. That what made me think of when you're talking about the forest owning itself, and because that has a lot to do with the narratives of data ownership, because they've kind of moved from data privacy in some ways to data ownership, and like what we talked about with the soul-bound tokens, and people able to, it gets kind of complicated because like with part of what they've realized or starting to explain to people is that like data privacy is kind of doesn't really work as a concept. It's like not really possible because there's no such thing as like what's your date. There's no clear line except for some very specific things like your social security number or whatnot is there's no clear line between what's your data and what someone else's and whatnot. So they're building the data commons where we can own and monetize your data and control how it's monetized, they say, through Web3 and DAOs and blockchain and all that. And then that's kind of what would be going on with the forest. So the digital twin version of the trees would be able to own and monetize their own data, which would be part of the funding mechanisms for them to pay for the firefighting drones or Boston Dynamic dogs to protect the forest. And yeah, and that would involve the people too, and the conservation groups, and it would be there'd be all those different interlocking.
Well, the interesting thing is this particular forest is not far from Kirkland, Washington. And a bit ago, I had actually done a blog post in maybe 2018. I have a friend who lived in the greater Seattle area, and there was a park that was taken over by Google, like upgraded, right? Public-private partnerships. The city can't afford to fix the park, so the companies will do it, and they'll put in their beacon sensors everywhere. And so the premise was, it was a summer parks program that the children would go and do STEM activities in the park. And then through this gamified interface of learning about nature and learning about science mediated through a device, which had geolocation data tracking on it, which had step counting and fitness tracking on it as well, because that's the health data analytics that they want, that the kids could interface with the educational materials in the park and then earn a chance to win, right? It's always like, you don't get the money, like a chance to win or a chance to earn a grant for your PTA for your school. And so like this was Kirkland, Washington, where this was happening. It was like the Kite STEM initiative. And, as if all the parks are actually well taken care of and kids are safe to just go off and wander in parks with their phones, not paying attention, and doing that. But when I was looking at Glenn Weil, who is with the Soulbound tokens, one of the 3 authors of the Soulbound token paper, like his LinkedIn is also in Kirkland. So he's in Kirkland. These initiatives are in Kirkland, like the Google Parks, the blockchain cryptocurrency, buying the forests out. And then within that same space are, the push for mega cities, the push for the enclosures, stack and pack, like push people in, like all in the name of things that sound great, walkable cities, bikeable, fresh produce. But that's not their intention. Their intention is a much more sinister underlayment.
Everything will have a digital identity and different layer, like your digital identity will be in a whole hierarchy. Like it's not just like you have your one digital ID and that's it. It's like you'll be in the DAOs, have all these associations, you'll have your education, like that'll be your own thing. And that's kind of what I was trying to explain with the Soulbound tokens paper, is that they're moving towards like identity and digital identity as like a social construct. And that would also include eventually all the digital twinned animals and plants and forests and stuff. It's not the way,
it's fractal, really. It feels like, because to me, if you understand it as a market logic, like the market needs to have infinite growth
Yeah.
there's a limitation on the material realm. Therefore, you create a digital empire,
Yeah.
and then within that digital empire, you continue to fragment upon fragment, because with that, each fragment creates value.
Yeah.
In and of itself, in the fragmentation and the atomization. So we just become more and more fragmented, and then they create impact markets around mental health. Like they want you to interact with like holographic, like normally, I mean, you put that back 10 years and someone who's dealing with like twinned holographic consciousness, they would say, you're schizophrenic. You have issues, right? And they're like, no, this is totally all normal. Good. Like, this is how we do it now.
This is health now. This is
like,
happy,
you're saying you
people.
need to know how to interface with my 6 different identities. How did we get here?
Alfred Loomis, I don't know for that, but
so I think that, so can I say, so to me, because again, I came in the education door, and so that's like my initial like frame. So I look at things and you go back and you revisit things that you knew before with new understanding. And so with this idea of, school with badges, earning badges in the world, like Pokemon Go education, there was an entity called Newton in 2012. So again, like a decade back, where they were already imagining massive data collection through educational technology to make predictions about people's learning. And of course, this is all framed that we just want equity and we want to close gaps and achievement gaps and give people opportunities. But really, it was about mirroring them as twins and making predictions. And so eventually that company, Newton, folded. And everyone was like, see, that was such a dumb idea, but it just wasn't time for that yet. Like they incorporated all of that research into IMS Global and the XAPI badging for the twins. But one of the key employees, his name was Brian Fitzgerald, and he swung out into, he created a company in Northampton, Massachusetts, which again, is kind of odd to me because Massachusetts has so much. I would expect it from Boston or like Hartford or some of these, but like Northampton, like Crunchy Granola, it was a pop-up preschool model where stay-at-home parents would do activities in parks with toddlers and on a pop-up basis, which is just an odd business model, because normally if you need pre-K, it's because you have a business obligation that 9 to 5, like you need somewhere for your kid to be, not a pop-up really. Or if you're going to do, if you don't need that, then you're already doing that and you have a co-op with other parents and you do that anyway and you go to the park. You don't need to hire a service. So this model didn't really make sense until you understand 2 years of lockdowns where people are working from home, and in that context of like perpetual pandemic, like intermittent lockdowns, pop-up preschool for your mental health of all involved makes sense, right? As a business model, but it didn't 4 years ago when I first found it. But they would have apps that would give you suggested activities, hands-on activities in the parks. And I know from being in the garden work that there was interest in forest schools, right? Like immersing yourself in the forest and like knowing, and they've created in the public school setting such repressive and aggressive and standardized approaches to children. They're really dehumanizing. Like it's done on purpose. Like every single art, music, sports, social activities, that's all shredded and gutted out. And really you just sit there and are tested and evaluated. And then the last 2 years put in a mask in a plexiglass box. So it's mentally harmful. So of course parents are going to be like, like I want my kid to have expeditionary learning, like in the forest. But what they're not realizing is now with the sensor-based technologies and wearables, that surveillance that needed to happen through a Chromebook or a tablet or a phone is now in your smart uniform, in your smart watch, in smart sensors on the trees and the beacons. And so from these earliest, they need to capture the minds of today's 3-year-olds to make them total compliant metaverse citizens. Like we're all on a spectrum. Some of us are like more likely to be integrated into the metaverse than others, but the full court press of early childhood education and human capital analytics is on this generation. Like this is will be the first metaverse generation. So
it's definitely worth bringing up that Seb Kamavar literally, literally creating like, I think they have like over 30. He created through, it's a little weird because it, like reading some of the articles, it's written like he created this network of Montessori schools himself, but it's also
MIT.
MIT Media Lab listed as like their project. But yeah, I mean, it's
and he was Google personalization. Like he came out of like the head of Google personalization,
yeah,
led social computing at MIT, and then just happens to come up with a Montessori pre-K program that's franchised, that they put Internet of Things sensors in all the kids' felt slippers. And again, the branding is good.
And cameras everywhere in the class. And
yeah, like, with artificial vision to score the kids, like, but unintrusively, right? Because we care about their social behaviors. And like, once you understand the Montessori model as independent learning, and that people doing independent learning, these little beings, become agents, generating their own data streams for the hive mind consciousness AI mirroring. Like, yeah, of course it's the Montessori model. And, you know, that's the, like, I was reaching out to Eisenstein, like before I realized that he had done multiple interviews with Camvar and CeeLo, saying like, hey, this guy you're hanging out with, like, he literally has artificial vision cameras spying on the kids in his schools. Like, is this sacred? This does not feel sacred. There's like nothing sacred about
this. The sharing economy.
Yeah, share your data. If you're a good person, you'll share your data.
Did you respond? Did you respond?
No, because like it's reprehensible. What they never respond.
Yeah.
Because they're living in another story. The stories are not congruent.
You did get a response from the radical exchange people.
Oh yes, that's right. I shared with her like the surveillance play tables for Hatch. I'm like, these soul-bound tokens that you're promoting are going to be like used to track like Black and brown kids in Head Start. Like, do you think your grandmother, because she was like saying how much she appreciated her grandmother, and I wasn't trying to be cutting, but I'm like, do you guys really not know what you've built? Like, and honestly, the more I looked at that paper in relation to the Institute for the Future's projections, like there wasn't really much new in that paper. So like it does make me sort of wonder like whose fingerprints are on that publication, and why certain people were chosen to front that. And clearly Buterin because of the smart contracting, but while, I mean, he's the social like analyst, geopolitical social analyst for Microsoft Research.
Yeah.
And like, who thinks that that's liberation? Seriously, like all you needed to do is look at his LinkedIn, like his own website. He calls himself the Octopest or something, like the tentacles of Microsoft to make them accountable. Like, who really thinks that having a soul-bound token is making Microsoft accountable? And he was the one that uplifted, because I think within the three authors, Puha was not as like in certain circles acknowledged, and they're like, hey, crypto bros. No, it was the woman that did the most work. It was the woman of color.
Yeah.
And I'm like, in this twisted framework, it feels to me that they create sacrificial people to stand up in front of the story. Like the story needs to be the woman of color created the tokens that create the, like, we're not going to tell you till later it's the open air digital prison, but look, how can you deny it? Because we're equitable. Like we're equitable. Right. Like, and again, she came out of Stanford Law. Like, you know, people have their own path, but clearly Stanford is a central player in all of this. You can't have come upon that trajectory. And I understand how you can keep yourself in a certain frame and not want to look, but when someone lays it out very clearly and says, this is the use case, they would never answer the use case. They would not say if it was intended for skills badges, which clearly it is. You can't have developed that and not know that they're going to be used for skills badging. Someday they'll catch up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems like things get more and more clear because more and more is happening every day, literally. So it's like one day something's gonna like, it's gonna be some sort of snap. But
the tree of life is a bunch of buckets hanging on the wire from armature.
Yeah, we didn't really get into it, but that's like a huge. The tree of life is like I mean, obviously has a lot of significance in a lot of traditions, but in like esoteric stuff, that's like the mind. That's like the metaphor for the like cosmic mind. So yeah, it's atomizing the cosmic mind. It's, you know, that's kind of what they're doing with all the what we've been talking about for the last hour. So I mean, it's
I've been digging some into like California and like linking the eugenics history to this transformation of the human, which is what Nicholas Berggruen is connecting and with the California Trust Network legislation that's advancing, just, so kids can like trade up their education transcripts conveniently. Nothing about digital twinning, nothing about the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And but like Kavli is a central figure in California. Fred Kavli, who was a Norwegian American businessman who made his whole fortune in sensor technology in the aerospace industry, and for NASA and for GE and Ford. And then he endowed, I think he also had like real estate investments too, but he was quite rich. He created 15 institutes of physics, 5 of which are in California. So it's like UC San Diego, Santa Barbara, Stanford, Berkeley, and maybe Santa Cruz. But there's 5 of the 15 are in California, and Caltech, not Santa Cruz, Caltech.
Of course.
And and then they award prizes in physics for everything from, it's 3 prizes, like neuroscience, nanotechnology, and astrophysics. And so it's from the smallest neuron all the way up.
Yeah.
And their homepage actually has their logo, which is it Metatron's cube, and the whatever the life, like the little lotus kind of pattern.
Oh,
like
I know.
It's something it's not the tree of life, but it's the something else of life, like with the Vesica Pisces and all the little flowers, the flower of life, something like that. And they clearly just say it, like they just show you. And it's not the best logo because it's complicated. Like Metatron's cube is a complicated thing with all the circles and everything.
Right.
They're like, here we are. We're all about that. Like since 1979 at UC Santa Barbara, which is where Junipero Serra's papers are of the, Spanish mission, California mission system of domination. Like, yeah, that's where we have our theoretical physics conferences to talk about like the future of cosmology.
Like California too, and Caltech, that's where the Jet Propulsion Lab in the 20s or 30s, the very early rockets and weather satellites too.
Well, they have one of the early nanotechnology labs, and it's in Pasadena, which is the same location as the Human Betterment Foundation, which is the early eugenics. Like, their papers and their literature was very much connected to the racial hygiene in the Nazi era. Like they were very closely connected at the highest levels, highest levels of academia. So to me, the eugenics and the synthetic nature of life, it's a very clear trajectory. And it's very frustrating because in the past few years, they've had all these movements to like take down statues, take names off of buildings of these people, which while you understand on the one hand why you would want to withhold that privilege, it's also erasing the history largely. And yet these schools, the Stanfords, the Berkeleys, the Caltechs, they're not doing the synthetic biology. They're not actually interrogating how their cutting edge emerging technology research into nanobiotechnology mirrors eugenics, especially under the paradigm of economic austerity and automation. They're simply just taking the names off and saying, oh, we don't do that anymore. Because the story we live in now is synthetic biology is good.
Yeah, this is good because we're doing health and we're choosing the right outcomes. And,
it's so green. Can't you tell how so green it is? Well, do you have any last thoughts? I guess we're sort of probably wrapping up. I think I hit most of the stuff.
Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, it's
Can I read this last bit? This is from Robin Wall Kimmerer.
Yeah.
It's about animism, because I just feel like as a bookend of like understanding the language, right, and the world frame. So it says, when I first learned that word, it reignited for me the longing for that lost language. If there was people, if there was a thought system that contained a word for the life force of mushrooms, I wanted to learn it. She's like a moss lady. And one of the things that has made my very rudimentary attempts at learning Potawatomi both beautiful and really challenging is the grammar. It contains what I would call a grammar of animacy. One of the best ways perhaps to see what it is to say at first what our native language English is not. You know how in English we refer to each other as persons, but if we referred to that maple tree outside our window, we would have to refer to it in English as an it. In English, you're either human or you're an object. But in Potawatomi, this grammar of animacy means that we have the linguistic structure to speak of the living world as if it were alive, as if it was a person, as if it were our family, because in our way of thinking, it is. And isn't that so very interesting that in English that has supported this, well, let's be honest, in many cases, a very pretty exploitative way of thinking about the earth, as if it was just stuff, as if it was just a commodity. And while that's what our language lets us do, it only lets us speak of water as if it was an it, not as if it was a who. And like, to me, that feels like this encapsulation of this crazy game and the disparagement of the original like cultural land-based practices and faith-based practices, and this aberration into a gamified economic construct of colonial domination.